Hi folks, this is Grim Perspectives, I'm Grim. Today I'd like to continue building our Diablo pen and paper world. So we are building a Savage Worlds setting set in the world of the Diablo franchise. And the aspect I want to look at today is horror in the Diablo universe and horror in general. Because if you look at it, horror seems to be a big part of the Diablo franchise. If you look at the cover art, of the concept art, at the presentation of the games, at the gameplay, then there are many aspects of horrors in the Diablo franchise. But if you play it, do you feel afraid? Do you feel fear for your character? You might fear mobs killing you and you don't get back to your corpse, so you lose XP and in Diablo 2 loot. But you don't really fear anything else than, well, losing a part of your game progression. And that's a strange thing because, well, you walk around Diablo 2 as an example now. You walk around and one of the first things you see are the mutilated corpses of rogues put on spits in front of the rogue encampment. And bodies and cadavers lying all around. And you might think to yourself, well, that's grim. That's dark. And then you continue playing, and after 5 minutes or so, that horror fades. You seem to become jaded to it. You have seen the gruesome aspects of the game, but it doesn't stick. And why is that? That's really part of the experience of horror games, is if it can make the atmosphere of fear, of horror, if it can make it stick. Why wasn't Diablo usually why wasn't it able to do that? And that's the main thing I want to talk to you about in the first part of this video, and then we're gonna go on and talk about game mechanics, how fear can work in Savage Worlds. So, how does fear work? Psychology Today published an article a while ago talking about that there are 5 components that all human fear is made up from. So there is no separate. If you want to break it down, then there is no fear of spiders, of open places, whatnot. You know, all those clinical things. But there are 5 separate aspects that make up fear, and those aspects are extinction, mutilation, loss of autonomy, separation, and ego death. I'm gonna link the article down below if you want to read up on it. It's an interesting read, but well, maybe the choice of words here doesn't really fly with pen and paper gamers. So to phrase it differently, humans fear that which kills us. We fear that which makes us powerless. We fear that which destroys our sense of self, our ego, and we fear that which exiles us from others. And if you look at that checklist, all of those aspects are present in the Diablo universe. There are plenty of things that will kill us. There are plenty of things that should make us feel powerless. Like one of the greater evils, Diablo, the aspect of terror. The game is named after the aspect of terror, so much for it has horror got a part in Diablo. Of course it has. It's Diablo, the aspect of terror. Okay, so there are plenty of things that make us feel powerless, or should make us feel powerless. And if you look at things like the opening sequence of Diablo 2, where the lone wanderer, who has imprisoned one of the greater evils inside himself, walks around the world, and he's haunted by the evil he carries inside him. That experience has destroyed his sense of self. He is no longer the person he was before. His ego, in the form it was before, is dead now. And because of that, and because of the evil he carries inside him, he is now an outcast. He's wandering from place to place. He's living in the seediest taverns. Well, maybe he's afraid he will be recognized, and he is, for all intents and purposes, an exile. So, the whole checklist is more or less, the whole checklist, all 5 points, are inherent in the first hour of gameplay of Diablo. So, why doesn't that fear stick? Why doesn't it have an impact on us? Why don't we experience fear and the aspects of horror when we play Diablo? Well, okay, let's take a step back. Because, of course, we do not want to make our players mortally afraid of our setting. That would be counterproductive. But we want the game to have an aspect of horror, something we can conceptualize, so we can think about it, not something that makes us run away in primal fear, but something we can think about, ooh, that is scary for my character, and feel a bit with him, but not as much so that it ruins our day, you know? Okay, how can you achieve that? So, why does this horror inherent in the Diablo universe, why does it lack impact? Well, let's look at where the horror is present. It is present in the lore, in the visuals, in the presentation of the game, but it's not present in the game mechanics. And I think that's an important part of the game, because visuals or the narrative may transport the horror, but game mechanics is what makes the horror stick. Because, as I've said, we do not want a game that makes us run away in fear. That's a bit too much for a pen and paper game. But we want to be able to conceptualize the fear as players of a character and as game masters. So we need a way to talk about it and a way to make sure that horror has a permanent impact on characters, are game mechanics. And there's simply no game mechanic in the Diablo franchise that really takes care of that. So the horror stays on that side of the screen and doesn't come haunting you. Let's take a look at a game that really did the game mechanics aspect of horror justice. Let's take a look at Darkest Dungeon. Darkest Dungeon, I don't know if you know it, but it's a really cool computer game. It's a bit retro, it's an indie game, I think, and it's really worth a look if you haven't tried it out yet. But what makes it special is that Darkest Dungeon has a mechanic called stress. In Darkest Dungeon, your adventurers explore different areas of an old mansion, and they face horrors. And those horrors might not only kill them, so there is a hit point mechanic, and your characters can die. But what also happens is that the monsters and what they face, they do scary shit, magical shit sometimes, and that stuff stresses your characters out. They become more and more afraid. And if you accumulate too much stress, then, well, things start to go wrong. And they can go really wrong. Because what happens if your character takes too much stress is you lose control over your character. You might say, attack that monster. And he might say, no, I'm not gonna do that. I have now that mental condition that is randomly determined, and that makes me act in a specific way. Fanatic, fearful, so he might just go on full defense or something like that. You essentially lose control over your characters. it also means that there's loss of control sometimes leads to your characters scaring other characters because they start spouting crazy shit, or they become doomsayers, like we're all gonna die here, we're gonna that's stuff like that, or they start spouting really gruesome, grisly, bloody stuff, like I'm gonna bathe in your blood and stuff, that kind of thing, and all of those things stress the other characters out. So you have a party of 4 characters, one starts to go insane, and everyone else will probably go insane if you don't do something about it very soon. All the other characters will go insane as well. And that cascading mechanic, one character is stressed out, goes insane, you lose control over him, antisocial behavior happens which stresses out the other characters, soon spirals out of control, and your whole party is dead. And it's really sometimes as bad as it sounds, because in Darkest Dungeon you are not only faced with threat from multiple angles, so it's not only the health of the physical health, the hit points of your characters you need to look out for, it's also the mental health of your character, their stress levels that you need to watch out for, but the game will also continue mercilessly. You don't have save files where you can just load something if something went wrong. No, if your character is dead, then that character is dead. You can recruit other heroes, but they will be inexperienced. You have to level them up again, and you lost that hero. And the horror in Darkest Dungeon works so well that when I tried to script this video, and I tried to when I tried to open the game, my mouse button was hovering over the Darkest Dungeon icon, and I was really like, do I really want to do it? Do I really want to click on that? That's scary as fuck, and the game's mean to me. Do I really want to play it? And of course I did. But it's really a game that makes you afraid. Afraid for your characters, afraid of loss. And the game mechanics really work. So, what does that mean? Well, it means we need game mechanics to make horror a part of your game. If we don't have game mechanics, which, well, some settings do, especially those settings that don't focus heavily on horror, then horror might be something that Game Master evokes in his storytelling, but it's probably not gonna be something that sticks with your character. And if we want horror to stick with your character, we need game mechanics for that. So let's take a look at game mechanics. In Savage Worlds, there are 3 separate aspects to being afraid. There's 3 different game mechanics. There's fear, there's terror, there is sanity, which is an optional rule that is introduced in the Horror Companion and settings like Rippers. And then we have a separate thing that we might want to include into our Diablo franchise, that is corruption. And we'll take a look at all 4 of those in the next part. So, fear. Fear is if you see something grisly, like the rogues, the mutilated dead bodies of the rogues on spikes. That's definitely something grisly. Or you discover something man was not meant to know. Like in Diablo 2, there is this ruin with a tomb on it. And in that tomb, you read about some noble woman who bathed in the blood of innocents and stuff like that. And it's really well written, and it might make you afraid. And that might be something that man was not meant to know, like an eldritch secret. And it might be go even scarier than that. If you open up the Necronomicon in other games, yeah, you're about to lose your sanity, pretty much, certainly. So, how does fear work? Well, Fear works, fear makes you shaken. That's a game mechanic in Savage Worlds. If you don't know too much about Savage Worlds, it might be worth getting a book, or you can just browse through the other videos I did on creating the Diablo setting, in which I cover some of the rules, but not too extensively. So, it makes you shaken, and you need to roll spirit or vigor as determined by the game master. So if it's like you want to stop yourself from throwing up, then it might be more centered on vigor. Or if it's more mental fortitude that's affected here, then you might want to roll spirit. And if you don't make it, you suffer a level of fatigue, and you can only get the level of fatigue back when you're out of the influence of whatever caused your fear. So a level of fatigue is pretty nasty, because since Savage Worlds works with so low target numbers, normal success is if you roll a 4, a level of fatigue, which means that you get -1 to your rolls, is really a big deal. You don't want that. It's not something that will stick permanently with your character, but it's something you want to avoid. But since you can recover the level of fear by going out of the area of effect of whatever caused the fear, it's not that much of a problem to for your character to recuperate from that. Then there's terror. Terror is some unnatural, supernatural evil. If you face Diablo or one of the lesser evils, that would definitely be something in the realm of terror. And what terror does, it invokes that primal fight or flight response in you. And it forces you to roll spirit, and you probably get a penalty to that, because if you're facing something like Diablo, the aspect of the greater evil, the aspect of terror, then you probably get a -3 or something on that roll, so it's not really easy to resist. And if you fail that roll, you need to roll on the fear table. And the fear table includes everything from an adrenaline surge to you're just shaken, you're panicked and actively running away. You get permanent phobias for whatever invoked that terror, or you get a heart attack and might just die. So, terror is terrifying. Who would have guessed it? It's really something that can really mess up your, well, the combat you might want to start there, because if half the party is running away, that's not the best start of a combat encounter, and it might even have permanent effects on your characters, because they might have phobias or even a heart attack and die. And the third aspect that Savage Worlds gives you as concerning rules is sanity, which is an optional mechanic, so you can use it, you are not forced to use it. And sanity covers long-term loss of mental stability through trauma. And sanity is useful for games where you want to be able to have a game mechanic to handle that. If you want your characters to be forced to reconsider their action because they are on the verge of breaking down, or if they go further on, if they investigate further, they might be losing their sanity, then you might want to use the sanity optional rules. And what sanity does is you get a sanity score, which is your half your spirit die +2. So for a normal character, about 5. And if you fail a spirit roll related to terror or fear, then you lose points. You lose your sanity points. And if you fail them really bad, like you roll a 1 on your spirit die, or you roll snake eyes, so both your spirit roll and your wild die come up a 1, then you lose more points, and there might be even additional problems with that. And if you lose sanity points so much that you have none left, then you need to roll on a table, and you pick up exciting new mental disorders. So your character will really, well, what he does will take a toll on him. And if you want to manage that, then the sanity rule is an interesting one for you. And what I find especially interesting from a mechanical point of view is that it works not by being something completely separate, but it works by influencing the fear and terror rules that are already in there. Because it says if you fail a spirit roll related to terror or fear. So it is really plugging into the fear and terror game mechanics. And if there's not that much fear or terror in a campaign, then sanity won't be too much of a problem. So, what are we gonna do with our Diablo setting, considering we've got those three possibilities? Well, let's take a look. We can use fear for mundane horrors and for dark knowledge. So, if we open a book consider what that talks about necromancy, if we open the memoirs of someone who went crazy, that might call for a fear check. And mundane horrors such as bodies and corpses and horrific things that we see might call for a fear check as well. Keep in mind, something that I didn't talk about yet is that fear has an additional mechanic built into it, and that is that you will become jaded. So if something like you see the body of a dead rogue mutilated on a stick, might force you to roll a fear check. If you see a second body the next time, you're probably not going to freak out in the same way. You've seen that before. So the same things, or things that aren't really worse than something you did before, doesn't force you to make fear checks all over again. Your character just becomes jaded. And that means that as a game master, we can start with subtle horrors and then escalate from that, because every time it gets significantly worse, like if the rogue you see mutilated there is not just any rogue, but it is someone you knew, then that's definitely worse. And you'll roll fear checks again, and it helps you establish a momentum going forward. So, we'll use fear for mundane horrors and dark knowledge. We'll use terror for the bigger evils and maybe certain boss enemies that we are gonna sync up, but we'll use it sparingly, because if your character is pretty much forced to run away from an encounter, that messes with gameplay pretty much. And while we want to have a setting that's focused on the horror aspects, we do not want it to be Cthulhu style, where every corner your character will run away, will become insane, and is forced to do something he'd otherwise not do. We do not want to take too much control of their characters away from the players. So we'll use terror sparingly, but we will use it. And we're gonna use the sanity rules for the slow descent into madness. So in an adventure, in a session, your character might be forced to make a fear check, and he might be even on occasion forced to make a terror check. But that is not going to hinder him too much. That's not the main thrust we're going at concerning horror. What we're going for is the slow descent into madness. That if you keep up that fight against evil, then you will slowly succumb to magic if you aren't really resilient, really lucky, or willing to work with others through that terror. So, sanity for the slow descent into madness. And what I'd like to do as well is taking corruption into there. And not making it a totally separate mechanic, but having corruption be something that ties into the sanity, fear, and terror mechanics, much like the sanity mechanic itself ties into the fear and terror mechanics. And how can we do that? Well, we can offer corruption as a drawback of some really powerful stuff. So I talked about setting the theme about that there is no power without cost. If you want to make your setting scary and you want to make it clear that mankind is the minor player in this epic and you are really fighting against demons who are much stronger, much more powerful than you, then there shouldn't be just magic items galore lying around that give you power without taking anything from you. So corruption might work in a way that you find a magic item, like say you find a great sword and it turns out that it's not any great sword, it's the headsman. It's a cursed great sword. And that great sword might have things like +4 to fighting on cold shot to the head. So it takes, you can really decapitate people with it. But it might also have the mechanic that it is cursed and that you lose sanity not only when you fail a fear check or terror check, but also when you roll a 1 on your fighting die. And to tie it up and to really make it flavorful, let's give it a cool backstory. Like it is the sword of a headsman who was used to decapitate a royal family gone rogue, and he spectacularly failed to decapitate the queen. He took like 4 blows or something, and it was really a mess. And he slowly went insane over that failure because his job was blood and death, and then he failed at that, and he was reduced to, well, a madman, and he started to kill people and hack them apart, hack their heads off, to enforce his own sense of self, to make himself feel competent again. So he descended into madness. It's a warning to the players who use this weapon. It might be really powerful, but it might very well also corrupt you. And that's a mechanic, I think, that we can use pretty well for a bunch of stuff. And so that is not a totally separate mechanic, but ties into the same mechanics we had before. And, well, that's my take on fear and terror in the Diablo universe, and how I would like to handle it in a setting. And, well, maybe you have got your ideas on that. If you have, I'd pretty much like to hear. Do you agree with what I said? Would you want to take it in a different way? Yeah, let me know. So, as always, if you like the video, then help the channel grow. If you like the video, hit like. If you want to stay up to date on what we're doing next, be aware we don't only have this world building Diablo style videos. There's also the Grim Advice section where we talk about being a game master, being a player, tips I can give you relating to Savage Worlds and to role playing in general. So it's not only that. So if you want to stay up to date on anything I do on this channel, hit subscribe. And if you know someone who might be interested in what we're doing here, then tell them. And maybe they'll take a look and maybe they'll participate here. I'm really interested in making this community grow and to have a discussion about it. So until next time. Maybe if you're planning on playing horror, then maybe until the next time, try to think of a road to hell that your players would actually choose to travel on. Until next time, Grim out.